This is a short film about my grandmother, Elinor Yeo, and her career in reproductive rights. She is the oldest of three girls and attended the Dwight School for Girls in New Jersey. She then attended Smith College in Massachusetts and Union Theological Seminary in New York City. At Union, she studied progressive theology under reformers like Reinhold Niebuhr and Robert McAfee Brown, both advocates of the social gospel, or Christianity in the name of social reform. She was one of the earliest female pastors to be ordained into the United Church of Christ. She met my grandfather, Richard Yeo, while they were both serving in the campus ministry at Boston University. After spending time at the campus ministry at George Washington University in D.C., they moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where they joined the campus ministry at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. It was there that my grandmother began her involvement in reproductive rights issues.
Well, I got involved. I was a campus minister at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. And my husband, Dick, was also a minister to students. And he discovered that he had some money in his budget for a secretary, except that he didn't need or he didn't want a secretary, but he did want to have somebody on the staff who had an interest and a direct ministry to women students, of which there were many at the university. And so he went to his board and said that he would like to hire me to do that job. And I was delighted to do so. And so I started in, and I hadn't been there long when Dick got a phone call from another pastor, a Baptist minister, who said that there was a group forming of clergy who were very interested in the fact that there were so many women who had come needing abortion services and counseling, and because it was before Roe v. Wade, were in a real dilemma because abortion was illegal and they didn't know what to do. And he was convening a meeting of pastors who were interested in the issue and wanted to get together and talk about what they could do to help. Also at that point, there was a national organization forming, led by a wonderful Baptist minister in New York named Howard Moody. And so Dick didn't really feel that he wanted to do this himself, but he wanted me to do it. So I agreed, little knowing in what kind of direction this would take us. But I went, and it was a real eye-opener, because what we did was to hear the lives of a number of women who had gone through with illegal abortions, and it was terrifying to listen to what they had to go through. In many cases, these women felt that they had very little choice. In some cases, they were ill. They had more children than they could handle, not enough money, and no help. In some cases, they had been raped. In some cases, there was a matter of incest. At any rate, in each case, they felt that they had no other recourse. And the stories that they told about illegal abortion were terrifying. We were in Milwaukee, and the closest resource for illegal abortions was in Chicago. And the method was to find an illegal place to meet somebody at a designated location, to go, to be blindfolded, to get into a limousine of some sort or a taxi, be driven blindfolded to an apartment or a hotel so that you wouldn't know where you were going, to be taken to a room, to be seen by what was supposedly a doctor, maybe yes, maybe no, to have nobody with you, no nurse, no friend, no support, to be very often painfully dilated, and then to be taken from the table, getting back in the limousine, and taken back to your original destination. It was a very distressing, humiliating experience. And sometimes there were complications, sometimes unsterile conditions, and left people feeling very hurt afterwards. And we as clergy knew that this was not the right way to treat people. And we knew that we had to do something about it. We were bound and determined, even before Roe v. Wade, at least to find places where abortion procedures could be done safely and under compassionate circumstances.
The National Clergy Consultation Service on Abortion began a search for skilled and trustworthy doctors who would perform safe abortion services despite the legal risks. Fortunately, there are many willing doctors to whom the clergy could refer their patients for help.
Because I was the only woman in the clergy service in our area, the word got around, and I probably had double the share of people coming as many of the others did. I saw people with all kinds of problems. Many, if not most, were very young. I saw girls as young as 13. And I saw a woman who was 50. So that you never knew. Some of the issues there were health, teenagers, unready to become parents, acute depression following a pregnancy, living in dangerous circumstances with an abusive partner. There were just so many problems that people had that made them feel that they could not continue a pregnancy. So people could ask, well, why this and why that? Well, they should ask themselves, could you do it? And in most cases, the answer would be no. The interesting thing was that when I was the director of a clinic later on, you'd be surprised at how many times a mother would bring in her very young daughter and say, well, I don't believe in abortion, but this is different. And I said to myself, you know, everyone is different. Everyone is different, not just your daughter. Of course it's different. It's a very difficult choice. In many ways, it can be a very sad choice. But so can having a baby that you don't want be a sad choice too. Not only a sad choice for the mother, but in many cases, a sad choice for the child. As clergy, we have some protection of confidentiality with people, which was an advantage. Although several were taken into court and were able to use that privilege to their advantage, luckily. I was taken to court once and was also able to escape. It was quite exciting.
There were some states that legalized abortion before Roe v. Wade, but only in specific cases, like if the pregnancy was due to rape or incest, or if the mother's physical health was at risk. Such states included Colorado, New York, and California. Women who could afford the trip would sometimes travel out of the U.S. to receive legal abortions in England or Sweden.
And in fact, I have memories of referring a number of people to New York. And it was an early plane from Milwaukee to New York, which was often inhabited by a number of women. Anyway, why should you have to travel state to state to get medical services that you needed? That was, again, humiliating, but at least they were safe, and that made a big difference. We had not been a service for long, about 2 years before Roe v. Wade. And then things changed dramatically.
This is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
Good evening. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions. The majority in cases from Texas and Georgia said that the decision to end a pregnancy during the first 3 months belongs to the woman and her doctor, not the government.
In a matter of weeks, a new clinic was set up in Milwaukee. So then a group of people came to me when I was still in the campus ministry and still in the clergy service, and asked me if I would be willing to consider opening another clinic in Milwaukee, right across the street from Planned Parenthood. And I thought about it, and Dick and I talked about it, and I said yes. I had some things that I knew that I would like to do, and I said yes. And it was a struggle getting it going. And I didn't quite realize that the location was not going to be a good one, because I hadn't really thought of the idea of the picketers. And it was right on kind of a main street, and the building was pretty much on the street with a sidewalk in front of it, which was the very meat for the picketers. The first day it was open, there was a big snowstorm the night before, but the word had gotten around, and we had about 10 appointments, I think, that day. And I had assembled a really good staff, including some wonderful counselors, 2 or 3 who had worked with me in the clergy service. They weren't pastors, they were women who had real concern for other women, and they were wonderful. They were wonderful. And some nurses, and we were very wet behind the ears, but we managed. And about 2 weeks into our practice, I should have known what was going to happen. One day I looked out of the window, and there they were outside. We had quite a group of protesters, and they had their own personalities. There was old Tony. He was the one who spat on the sidewalk at the patients. He also spat on my brand new pair of shoes. Then there was young Tony, who used foul language at the patients, and he used to go abroad during the summer to some kind of a retreat in, I don't know, Yugoslavia or something, and he'd send me postcards and say, "Wait till I get back." And then there was the lady who lived in a very fancy house right near me, who dressed sort of like a nun, but she would use very vile language to the patients as they would try and get in the door. And there wasn't much we could do about it. They were, quote, on a public sidewalk. And another favorite story was when two of my sons and two of their friends decided one day that they need to do something about this, and that they thought that maybe the sidewalk on a Saturday morning when we were open needed to be hosed down. Well, they did manage to move the picketers kind of out of the way for a while, and that worked pretty well. Then they considered the idea of getting some snakes,
Real snakes?
real snakes, and putting them on the sidewalk to scare the picketers, but that they couldn't find the snakes, unfortunately. This caused some real hilarity at the dinner table as they thought what they could do. But you have to understand this was healthy, very healthy, that the best way to deal with situations like this is not to cry and yell over it, but to deal with it in other ways. And this was the best thing that could have been. But the people it was hardest on were the patients. It was very hard on them. To be sworn at and treated as criminals was very, very difficult. And the staff also. But we then got some volunteer escorts who would wear pennies, out on the street and help people get in. And that was also a big help, it really was. And then we hired a security guard company who at least were able to take notes and identify who might be working illegally. And that also helped too, but it didn't take away from the burden. And in the meantime, at least at the clinic itself, things were going quite smoothly. Once people were able to get inside, why, it worked very well. But then the picketers started to get even more violent. They painted a big swastika on the building. They glued the locks to the front door so that we had to find a way to get the front door open so that people could go in. In the meantime, they would stand outside and be harassed by the picketers. The only funny thing was the guy who managed to get into the changing room, chain himself to the table with cufflinks. No, not cufflinks.
Handcuffs.
Yes, handcuffs. And then he couldn't figure out how to get out of the handcuffs. So the nurse moved all the patients into another room and let him lie there, unable to get out of his handcuffs. And he kept begging for somebody to come. We just let him lie there. And then the police had to come in and get him out of his handcuffs. I think he was a bit embarrassed. But at any rate, then came the biggest day of all, which was the day that there was no security guard. And we found out, I called the security guard company to say he didn't show up today. And the guard company said, oh, because you called and said that we didn't need a guard that day. It turned out that the picketers had pretended to be me and said that we didn't need one that day. And we had noticed a guy walking up and down with the picketers who didn't look as if he belonged there. He was just kind of strange looking, and he didn't fit in with Tony and the others. And all of a sudden, he started yelling that he was going to bomb the cars in the parking lot. And he was looking for the doctor's car so he could bomb it. And I had called Dick at home to say that there was no guard there that day. So Dick came down to see what he could do to help. And he was there, and when he heard about the car bombing, he came into the clinic, grabbed the camera, and went out and was going to take a picture of this guy who was headed toward the parking lot. And the guy saw Dick and the camera and rushed him, knocked him down in the parking lot, and broke his arm very badly. So we called an ambulance who came and took him over to the hospital. And he had broken his arm very badly and had to be hospitalized. Well, luckily there was a policeman across the street who came and arrested this character. At any rate, that was not the best of all days, let's put it that way. Then the picketers started middle of the night phone calls to me. You just get to sleep, say about 1 or 2 in the morning. And they'd call with no purpose except to wake you up about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. So I had to answer the phone because we had an answering service in case somebody had a problem, a medical problem in the middle of the night. So I'd have to answer it, but they would just do it to ring the phone to wake you up. Then we had a wonderful visitation. That was the famous Picket the Yeo household day. And that was the day that I had been in Madison for a teen pregnancy conference. And got a phone call from the Milwaukee Journal reporter who said, Elinor, I think you know, or I think you ought to know, that your protesters are on the way to your house to picket. I said, oh, that's interesting. And she said, I think you better go home because they're on the way. And Madison is about an hour and a half's drive. Mm-hmm. So she said, I have called your house. I said, good. So I got in the car and drove home. Well, luckily, our youngest son, Matthew, was at home. He was a senior in high school, but I think it was a Saturday, and he was home, and Dick was home. So Matthew went into action immediately. He was a very good actor, and he knew how to stage something. So he had heard that they were going to another doctor's house a few blocks away. So he thought he would psych out where they were at that point. So he drove up and found that they were, in fact, on the way to the other doctor's house. And so it would be a little while before they got to our house. So he and Dick set up some chairs on our front porch. So by the time the picketers arrived at our house, Matthew and Dick had set up a scenario in which some neighbors, the pastor of our church, and some members of the church were seated waiting for the picketers who appeared. And I must say, I think they were a little taken aback to find a number of supporters sitting on the porch, totally ignoring them. Because I think what they really wanted probably was some sort of a confrontation.
A reaction, yeah.
And they didn't get it. All they got was sort of bored looks from the porch. So they marched up and down. But probably the worst thing they did, they had a bunch of very ugly leaflets portraying me as a killer, a murderer. And they didn't leaflet the people on the porch, but they ran up and down in the neighborhood handing out these leaflets to people. And then they sauntered away. They never came back again. Whereas they did the same thing to a doctor in another community. And because he hid in his house, came to the door, yelled at them, and then went and hid, they kept coming back. Mm-hmm. And so I think we learned a very good lesson there.
Right.
Yeah. So, anyhow, it was shortly after that, and after Dick's arm was broken, that I'm sort of ashamed to say that we'd had it. And when Dick was offered another job, and when Matthew was also leaving to join his brothers back in the East to go to college, that we decided it was time for us to move back home too. So we did. And we missed our wonderful, wonderful friends and supporters who always came to our aid and our friendship. But it was time for us to come back home, and we did. Well, I guess I haven't mentioned that for a number of years I was very involved with NARAL.
Oh, yeah.
The National Abortion Rights Action League, as it was called then. It's now called NARAL Pro-Choice America. And I was on the board for several years, and then I was the chairman of the board for 4 years. And that, of course, that drove them crazy. Crazy, crazy, crazy. The United Church of Christ, in which I'm a pastor, has been pro-choice for years, and they were absolutely so supportive that I can't tell you. Somehow that's made a big difference to me, that my church has really backed me up. Well, one of my professors, my favorite professor, who married Dick and me, has a phrase that I love: faith, hope, and love, and courage, which may be the most important because it includes them all. No, you can't have faith without having courage. I mean, I think most people who are pro-choice are not pro-abortion. And as a matter of fact, as I said, before, as counselors, we very much explored all the options with people. The thing that is really wicked are these fake clinics where people go in, have a pregnancy test, and then are exposed to absolute lies about abortion and how they're going to be sterile and how they're going to get breast cancer and all sorts of stuff. That's wrong. To me, the stupidest thing of all about abortion is to defund Planned Parenthood. Now, that doesn't make any sense at all. In fact, it's ridiculous to defund the organization that also helps to prevent abortion. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, but there you go. Who is going to make these decisions? Is it going to be the governor? Is it going to be the president? Is it going to be a court? Or is it going to be the woman? That's what it comes down to. And her conscience and those with whom she chooses to take counsel. Her doctor, her pastor, her family, or the government. It's that clear.